Florida lawmakers are back in Tallahassee this week for the second special session of the legislative off-season. This time, lawmakers are there to work on the 2026-2027 budget after failing to reach an agreement during their regular session that adjourned in March. Following weeks of disagreements between House and Senate leaders, they're in a special session this week negotiating issues, including education funding. Officials leading K-12 budget talks, House Representative Jenna Persons-Mullica and Senator Danny Burgess, spoke after a conference committee meeting Tuesday.
We both have the goal to provide the best funding model for education in the state of Florida that funds all of our kiddos and make sure that the fund follows them to their educational option of choice. And we want to get as much funds in to those children as possible. And this budget represents a historic amount of funding per student and our first offer and what the Senate has worked on. So we're going to end there with historic funding for education, historic funding for teacher salaries, and all the other details we will work out because we have the same goal.
And that's exactly it. The only thing I'll piggyback on is the key takeaway is we both want the same thing. We know that there's a lot of student movement. We know that there's a lot of challenges with tracking students and the numbers going to a public school versus the scholarship program.
If lawmakers do not reach an agreement on spending priorities for the state by July 1st, Florida could face a government shutdown. To help us understand where negotiations stand and what lawmakers are trying to resolve, we spoke to Douglas Soul, state government reporter for WUSF's Your Florida team on Wednesday. Douglas, how long do you see this session going?
So lawmakers are optimistic this special session, will go as scheduled. So right now, lawmakers are in the Capitol debating different budgetary items, reviewing different budgetary items by area, education, public safety, etc. And my understanding of their hopes is that they can finalize things toward next week, and by the week after Memorial Day weekend, have a final vote. So a final vote on the budget by the end of the month. An important note to listeners that once the budget is finalized and published, there needs to be a 72-hour waiting period between the review, the release, and the vote. That gives the public and lawmakers time to review it before it becomes the law of the land. There's a lot of money here at play, and I mean, as a journalist myself, I wonder, is 72 hours even enough? But that's what we're given, and that's an important time period of gleaning the most important takeaways. Right now, we're kind of in this wait and see with a lot of monetary areas. So right now, lawmakers are hopeful that the plan to get it done in the next couple weeks will happen. And there seems to be a little bit less drama than we've seen in the past, though that could completely unravel based off of myriad circumstances. But right now, there's optimism. I talked to Senator Don Gates. He's Republican. He's also a former Senate president. He's had more than a decade in special sessions under his belt. And he says that lawmakers have been ready to lay down their swords this special session. This past 2 years has been filled with and fueled by infighting. And he's optimistic that's kind of going to the wayside for the next couple weeks. It's a wait and see on that, though.
It's good to hear that there is optimism, but Doug, what happens if they don't pass a budget? What are the ramifications?
Sharon, that's a great question. And to some degree, it's a hard question because that's never happened before. The state has never entered into a partial government shutdown, which is what would happen if the state lawmakers don't get the budget done by the end of June. Come July 1st, there would be that partial government shutdown in that circumstance. And of course, the effects would be huge. And it's always noted, at least last year when the lawmakers also struggled to get a budget done quickly. This is the second year in a row lawmakers didn't get the budget done by the end of the regular session. But there's a lot of talk as they approach summer last year about what happens if that happens and it's hurricane season and something bad happens related to that. There's always so many concerns if something like this were to occur, but as stated, there is some optimism that they're going to get it done well before the end of June. But if not, the repercussions will be heartfelt.
So parents, teachers, and students are waiting to see what the budget is going to mean for education in Florida. As negotiations are underway this week, anything standing out to you?
Education makes the biggest portion of our state budget. And for good reason. There's so many school districts across the state, so many students, and it's always one of the most talked about areas of the budget. And that's not only just because of its size, but because of the importance to parents, as you mentioned yourself. One of the big areas of talk right now in the Capitol are on voucher programs. Now, those voucher programs, those programs that allow students to receive public funds to go to private schools or homeschooling experiences, they take billions of dollars out of the public school program dollar amounts. It's a significant amount and a growing amount. And on the Senate side, there was a bill that passed that would increase guardrails, increase accountability measures around those voucher funds. The House did not take that up, but there's a hope from the Senate side that even though you can't pass, a bunch of different policy bills inside the budget, that with the money that they set aside for that they can add guardrails and accountability measures just through the budget process. So a lot of wait and sees in that area. And there's also just, a lot of differences in a lot of different areas beyond that. For example, the Senate wants to put much more money aside for programs that would help small rural districts for things like services and staffing, technology costs, etc. The House provides a lot less. There's a controversial program called Schools of Hope related to charter school expansion. The Senate has funding set aside for that. The House does not. There's debates over construction amounts.
We're speaking with Douglas Soul, state government reporter for WUSF, about the special session happening now. Douglas, can you speak to the influence Governor DeSantis has in shaping the final agreement overall?
Governor Ron DeSantis is definitely still influential. That being said, I would say that he's far less influential than he's been in past years. The Florida House and its leadership has been far less willing to go along with everything the governor wants. There are a few areas that the governor wants to fund that the House is saying no to, at least right now. We have days, weeks potentially left for them to work out those differences. But I think top of mind to all lawmakers, not just during the budget making process, but during the whole of their careers as lawmakers, is that the governor has line item veto authority in the budget. A lot of times, lawmakers will seek out projects that individually and specifically benefit their districts. You see, like museum funding, infrastructure project funding. I mean, I could just keep on listing out things here, but they're very localized areas of focus in the budget. It's called usually the sprinkle list, back of the bill appropriations. And the governor likes to and often strikes a lot of those funding areas out. And I think all lawmakers are aware that if they upset him too much, that that's a possibility. That being said, the House has still been pretty resilient to some of what the governor wants. And I would imagine that continues to be the case. But I think every lawmaker, with everything they say and do, are aware that their projects are on the line.
You mentioned that it's not as dramatic this year. Any tensions or any moments that have stood out to you so far during this special session?
So far, the special session, I wouldn't say has been incredibly dramatic. And I'm going to knock on wood here because that's like, a begging for karma in terms of a statement. But, yesterday, I should say, on Tuesday, when the special session started, the House and the Senate sides, they didn't really give huge speeches calling out, insulting the other chamber. They just got to work. They teed up the budget conferencing process and they began the budget conferences. They began those individual meetings focused on various budget areas. Not a lot of theatrics, not a lot of huge heated lines. That could change, but as Senator Don Gates said, he felt that lawmakers were putting down their swords, at least for the time being. So I think one of the things that stood out is that those adversarial tones have yet to be very loud, at least during this process so far. But I should note to listeners as well that the vast majority of this budget making process is done behind closed doors. The meetings are fairly short when they do have them, at least compared to the discussions behind all of the items you see on paper and you see discussed by lawmakers. And once lawmakers leave, legislative leadership previously has said that they expect lawmakers to be in the Capitol this week, no later than noon Friday. But the budget chiefs at that point be left to figure out every outstanding issue. The budget chiefs being the, handpicked leaders of this process on both the House and Senate sides. And a lot of those meetings are also, and a lot of those discussions are going to be done behind closed doors as well. So if there is drama, we might miss it, but surely there will be indications in terms of if this process doesn't unfold as we expect, if it's not done by the end of the month. But right now, there's optimism, could change.
And what are you going to be watching for over the next few days?
I will, of course, be looking out for what's going on in the education side. That's always an important topic for our listeners. But that being said, so is everything else in the budget. I think what I'm most looking out for is, as previously stated, I'm putting my finger to the wind to kind of get a feeling of the currents of how things are going. Are we going to get done in time? Because if they don't, and there's a lag and there's a disruption, there's a roadblock, the end of this month is very, very close to the end of June, which is the deadline for them to get it done. So I'm trying to gauge their efficiency in this process. And also, got to be mindful that while Senate and House Republicans run this process, they have the supermajority in terms of leadership of the chambers. Democrats are also being very loud with their concerns with this process. They have called out Republicans for their belief that they're not funding programs that benefit Floridians affected by affordability issues sufficiently. So also want to keep like a gauge on how the listeners are responding, how the minority party is responding to what Republicans are doing, because obviously we want to get a good gauge, not just on leadership, but across the board.
WSF State Government reporter Douglas Soul, thank you for your time.
It's great to be on. Happy to talk.